On an otherwise ordinary Thursday in Whitesburg, Kentucky, in September 2024, 43-year-old Lecter County Sheriff Shawn Mikey Steins entered the chambers of 54-year-old District Judge Kevin Mullins and requested to speak with him alone. After exiting the chambers, the judge's staff members overheard gunfire. Steins then walked out with his hands up and surrendered without incident. He had shot Mullins, who succumbed to his injuries despite urgent life-saving measures being taken in an effort to save him. Steins is now facing a first-degree murder charge and is being detained in nearby Leslie County. While it appears as though he killed Mullins during an argument, the exact circumstances leading up to the shooting are unclear. The crime came amid a disturbing lawsuit that names Steins as a defendant. He's accused of turning a blind eye while one of his deputies, Ben Fields, accepted favors inside the courthouse from 3 women in exchange for sparing them from probation violations. Fields left the sheriff's office several months before the shooting and was sentenced to jail time and probation for his illicit activities. Some of these encounters occurred in Mullins' chambers, but it's unclear whether the judge knew what was going on. Authorities have also not revealed whether the lawsuit has anything to do with murder, and the case remains shrouded in mystery amid an ongoing investigation. Number 14. Anthony Reese Jr. On what began as an ordinary afternoon in November of 2021, police responded to a reported shooting at a factory in Fargo, North Dakota. 32-year-old April Carbone, who was 8 months pregnant, was fatally gunned down, along with her co-worker and the father of her unborn child, 43-year-old Richard Pittman. The couple and another employee, Porday Kegba, had been arguing with the suspected killer, 35-year-old Anthony Reese Jr., prior to the shooting. Management had ordered Reese to leave the property, but he returned a short while later and opened fire on the victims, shooting Pittman several times before turning the gun on Carbone. While the specific circumstances leading up to the double murder are unclear, Reese had been fired from the factory just days earlier. He later turned himself in and told police where they could find the murder weapon. Reese had 13 prior convictions and was on probation for an unrelated case at the time of the shooting. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder in hopes of receiving a sentence with the possibility of parole. But his lengthy rap sheet played a role in the judge's decision to impose a life term without parole. His attorney said that he would use his time in prison to better himself and pointed out that their client had shown remorse for his actions, despite his decision not to apologize during his sentencing hearing when given the opportunity to speak. Number 13. Samantha Marg. On an otherwise ordinary Wednesday afternoon in January of 2022, a man went to the 8th floor of a Philadelphia office building and beat 31-year-old receptionist Samantha Marg to death, later identified as 48-year-old Jeffrey Stepien. He approached Marg from behind and repeatedly struck her in the head at least 5 times with the metal implement. The young woman was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Responding officers crossed paths with Stepien when they arrived at the building in the Old Cities neighborhood. He was covered in blood and was carrying 2 bloody pipes in his bag. Witnesses confirmed that he was the attacker, resulting in his arrest on suspicion of murder and possession of an instrument of crime with intent. At the time of the incident, Marg worked for a company that rents out offices and co-working spaces. Stepien was renting space in the building, and it was believed that he may have even been living there in violation of the rules. Investigators speculated that he had recently been asked to vacate or was involved in a rent-related dispute, suggesting the possibility that he killed Marg in a disgruntled rage. News reports also noted that Marg and Stepien knew each other and had conflicts in the past, but that they were not in a romantic relationship, and the killing was not believed to be domestic in nature, describing Marg as literally the definition of a sweetheart. A co-worker told NBC 10 that someone had tried unsuccessfully to intervene during the attack, but for reasons that have yet to be disclosed, Stepien seemed to specifically have it out for her. The night before the killing, a Ring doorbell camera captured footage of Stepien pacing outside his former apartment building with the murder weapons in his hands. The building's former landlord claimed that the pacing went on for an hour and a half. Updates have not been forthcoming, but Stepien does not appear to be serving time in the state prison system, indicating that the case is likely ongoing. Number 12. Shawn Black. 30-year-old Courtney Smith and the father of her 3 children, 42-year-old Shawn Black, worked together at a warehouse in Blawnox, Pennsylvania. They separated in 2024 after dating for several years, and Smith soon began dating a younger co-worker, 26-year-old Daniel Zoel. As you can probably imagine, this led to some serious drama. Early one morning in March of 2024, Smith and Black got into an altercation at work. The fight became physical, leading to a struggle outside Smith's supervisor's office. Witnesses could hear Smith yelling, "No, no," as Black pulled a gun and shot her multiple times in the chest and at least once in the back of the head. He then fired at Zoel, striking him several times in the torso and limbs and leaving him critically injured. Multiple law enforcement agencies responded to the scene, where officers found Black kneeling on top of Smith with 2 guns lying on the floor nearby. He was taken into custody while Zoel was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. Smith was pronounced dead at the scene. Black was charged with homicide, attempted homicide, aggravated assault, recklessly endangering another person, and 2 gun counts. Prosecutors plan to seek the death penalty, despite the fact that there have been no executions in the state in over 25 years. Due to the complicated nature of these cases, it will likely be a long time before the case even goes to trial. Number 11. Jin Jin Lee. A renowned immigration attorney and legal scholar was senselessly stabbed to death by a disgruntled client at his office in Queens, New York in March of 2022. In addition to being highly respected in his field, 66-year-old Jim Lee was reportedly considered a hero for his participation in the 1989 pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. He was imprisoned following the demonstrations and later fled to America, where he settled down in the Flushing neighborhood and made a living helping others navigate the complex immigration process. Prior to his murder, Lee had agreed to represent 25-year-old Chinese student Xiaoning Zhang pro bono in her attempt to acquire an asylum visa, but he began to suspect the young woman of lying about her circumstances and changed his mind. Zhang had been granted a visa to study in Los Angeles, but instead of going to school there, she traveled to New York and applied for asylum, and she wanted Lee to help get a photo of her at a protest removed from the internet, furthering his suspicions that she wasn't being completely truthful with him about her situation. When Lee told Zhang that he could no longer represent her, she attacked him in his office. Police responded to the scene, but Lee urged the responding officers not to arrest Zhang. He suspected that she was mentally ill and didn't want her future to be jeopardized by a criminal record. 3 days later, Zhang returned to Lee's office armed with 2 knives and stabbed him in the neck and body. She then fled the scene, while emergency responders focused on trying to save the lawyer, who tragically succumbed to his injuries following a 10-day trial. In September 2024, a jury found Zhang guilty of second-degree murder, criminal possession of a weapon, menacing, harassment, and criminal obstruction of breathing or blood circulation. She's currently awaiting sentencing, which is scheduled in October, and is facing 25 years to life in prison. Number 10. Angela Pritchard. In October of 2022, police in the small town of Bellevue, Iowa, responded to a 911 call at a pet boarding kennel, where they found the business's 55-year-old owner, Angela Marie Pritchard, dead from a gunshot wound to the chest. Her estranged husband, 56-year-old Christopher Eugene Pritchard, immediately landed at the top of the suspect list. A court had granted Angela a no-contact order of protection against Christopher nearly 6 months earlier, following his arrest for domestic violence, but the order was terminated after about 2 weeks, even though Christopher refused to leave Angela alone. A few months later, Angela found a tracking device on her vehicle and 2 hidden cameras inside her home where Christopher was no longer living. She called the police, but Christopher wasn't arrested. Angela continued receiving unwanted correspondence from her estranged spouse, including threats to destroy her business and thinly veiled warnings that things were going to get real ugly. She continued complaining to law enforcement, and while Christopher continued to walk free, she at least succeeded in obtaining another temporary protective order. Over a several-week period in September 2022, Angela called the police 13 times to report violations of the protective order. She complained about Christopher driving past her house repeatedly, staring her down at a gas station, leaving handwritten notes on her doorstep, posting slanderous signs about her at his business, following her, and sending electronic correspondence. Even after Christopher was finally arrested, he walked free after a night in jail, skipped court, and was given time to get his affairs in order before turning himself in for a 6-day sentence. He murdered Angela during this time and is now serving a life sentence without parole for first-degree murder. But Angela's surviving family believes that her death was entirely preventable. In a civil lawsuit, the woman's surviving loved ones accused the Bellevue police of repeatedly failing to enforce Angela's order of protection, resulting in numerous missed opportunities to take action which would have possibly saved her life. The agency denies any wrongdoing and is fighting the case, which appears to be ongoing. Number 9. Benjamin Haroni. Late one afternoon in February of 2024, a disgruntled former patient entered the Smile Plus Dentistry and Orthodontics Clinic in El Cajon, California, and immediately opened fire on the staff. He fired around 24 rounds in just 1 minute, striking 3 employees. A 28-year-old Jewish dentist named Benjamin Haroni was attempting to hide behind a door when he was shot multiple times in the upper body. He died at the scene, while the office manager and another employee survived multiple gunshot wounds. Identified by police as 29-year-old Mohammed Sabah Abdul Karim, the accused killer had shown up at the clinic several times in the 6 months leading up to the shooting to complain about his dissatisfaction with some work he'd gotten done on his teeth. His erratic behavior scared staff members and his brother. Anwar Abdul Karim later told NBC San Diego that Mohammed had been acting strange in recent months. Anwar described his brother as being paranoid and plagued by persecutory delusions. He seemed to believe that everyone was after him, including gangs and cartels, and was reportedly seeing stuff that was not happening. Family members encouraged Abdul Karim to seek professional help, but their efforts were futile. Investigators would later discover that he had bought the gun used in the shooting just 2 weeks prior to the incident. By the time emergency responders arrived, the suspected killer had fled the scene in a U-Haul truck. A civilian spotted the vehicle later that evening and alerted the police, who took Abdul Karim into custody without incident. Inside the U-Haul truck, officers found a loaded handgun and several loaded magazines which were consistent with the spent ammunition left behind at the crime scene. Abdul Karim pleaded not guilty to murder and attempted murder charges and remains held without bail pending the outcome of his case. While the exact circumstances leading up to the shooting remain unclear, investigators have found no evidence to suggest that it was a hate crime. Number 8. Wilbert Ruiz. The workday was just getting started at a linen company outside Philadelphia. One morning in May of 2024, when a long-time employee, 61-year-old Wilbert Ruiz, got into an argument with a female co-worker. Witnesses later told police that they saw Ruiz step outside and make a phone call before re-entering the building with a gun and opening fire on the staff. Footage of the disturbing crime reportedly shows Ruiz methodically walking around the workplace and shooting at his colleagues. 29-year-old Giovanni Peña and his brother, 26-year-old Gigunson Peña, were killed by the gunfire, while 3 others were injured. The Peña brothers had migrated to the US from the Dominican Republic for a better life, only to end up dead long before their time. The female employee Ruiz had argued with was also shot as she ran out of the building. She narrowly escaped with her life when the shooter's gun either jammed or ran out of bullets. Ruiz would have continued killing if given the chance, according to prosecutors, but the police captured him nearby shortly after he fled the crime scene. He's facing 67 charges, including 2 counts of criminal homicide, first and third degree murder, 8 counts of aggravated assault, 48 counts of reckless endangerment, and a gun charge. He purchased the murder weapon legally in 2018 but did not have a license to carry it. Prior to the shooting, employees had grown increasingly concerned about the accused killer's behavior. There was a meeting to address the issue the day before the crime, but authorities declined to go into detail about the nature of the situation. According to the most recent available updates on the case, he remains held without bail while awaiting trial. Number 7. Josiah Goa. 34-year-old Josiah Goa was working as the manager of an apartment complex in Anchorage, Alaska, when he was gunned down in his office late one afternoon in October 2023. Investigators quickly identified a disgruntled tenant, 27-year-old Jesse Lee Jones, as the suspected shooter. Jones had just received a notice of a leasing dispute when he entered the leasing office shortly before 4 p.m. with the document in his hand and asked an employee if they were really kicking him and his pregnant girlfriend onto the streets. When he pulled a gun, Goa tried to disarm him, leading to a brief struggle between the two before Jones pulled the trigger. Goa had worked as the complex's community director for 6 years leading up to his death, and while his job naturally came with the challenges of sometimes delivering bad news and having uncomfortable conversations, he had never dealt with any confrontations as serious as the situation involving Jones. Spokesman Greg Sabana told Alaska Public Media that Jones was not on the lease for the apartment he was living in and was uncooperative with staff members who were trying to help him get added to the lease. Consequently, he was issued a non-renewal notice. Following the shooting, residents were instructed to stay inside their apartments while SWAT officers spent hours scouring the complex in search of the accused killer. Jones had left the property and was captured hours later in Meadow Lakes, roughly an hour's drive from the crime scene. He's currently in pre-trial detention as he awaits trial on charges of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and third-degree assault. Number 6. Darby Wagner Richardson. After leaving home as a teen, Darby Wagner Richardson found work as a dancer at a bar owned by the man she ended up marrying named Fred Wagner Richardson. They had 2 children together, but the marriage was reportedly fraught with abuse, causing Darby to feel trapped. She was 28 years old when she finally decided to end her marriage in 1987. Darby was looking forward to starting her next chapter in life, but she never got that opportunity because she vanished in March of that year and was never seen alive again. She failed to clock in during her overnight shift as a security guard at an engineering company in Racine, Wisconsin, prompting her concerned supervisor to search the property. Inside an office, he found Darby's jacket with the sleeves turned inside out, as if she had wriggled out of it while trying to escape an attacker. There was a broken clock nearby, prompting the supervisor to call the police out of a fear that something bad had happened to Darby. Responding officers found other disturbing signs of foul play, including evidence that the office door had been kicked in. Darby's car was missing from the parking lot, further indicating that she had been taken against her will. Over the next several hours, police found Darby's belongings scattered in various places along roads leading out of Racine. Early the next morning, the missing woman's car was found outside her workplace with her murdered body inside. She was unclothed, her throat and wrists had been cut, and her mouth was covered with duct tape. The particularly gruesome nature of the murder indicated to detectives that the crime was personal, and Fred Wagner Richardson quickly became a person of interest in the case. In addition to being a career criminal with violent convictions on his record, Fred was known for being ruthless in both his personal and work-related interactions. He was also Darby's only known enemy at the time of her death and had already violated a restraining order at least once. 12 hours before her murder, she and Fred had met with their lawyers to finalize the terms of their divorce. Fred had left the meeting noticeably upset about the prospect of having to give up a portion of the proceeds from his rental properties to Darby, but investigators were unable to definitively link him to Darby's murder, and the case went officially unsolved for decades, despite the general consensus being that Fred was the likely killer. Finally, in April of 2024, prosecutors charged Fred with first-degree intentional homicide. While it's unclear what triggered the decision to move forward with a case against the 83-year-old. The authorities have made it clear that they believe they have a strong enough case. Fred pleaded not guilty and is free on $50,000 bail while awaiting his next court hearing, which is scheduled for October. Number 5. Christopher Goia. In June of 2024, police were called to a Wingstop restaurant in Irving, Texas, where they found the manager, 19-year-old Christopher Goia, dead from multiple gunshot wounds at around 7:30 p.m. Also at the scene was an injured employee who had been struck in the head and leg by stray bullets. Goia worked 2 jobs to support his parents while his father battled health issues. As his dad's primary caretaker, Govia's mum was unable to work. Due to these circumstances, Goia was especially hard-working for his age. He spent a lot more time at his jobs than most teenagers, in hopes of saving enough money to buy his parents a house. On the evening of his murder, Goia had gotten into an argument with an employee, 22-year-old Mark Leon, and sent him home early. According to the surviving employee, Leon pulled a gun from his waistband and fired repeatedly before fleeing the restaurant on foot. The accused killer had reportedly only been working at the restaurant for a few weeks when the shooting occurred. Responding officers apprehended Leon near the restaurant within 10 minutes of arriving at the scene. They also found a discarded murder weapon. Leon was charged with murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and remains behind bars at the Dallas County Jail with bonds set at $1.1 million. Number 4. Michelle Mockbee. Early one morning in May of 2012, 42-year-old Michelle Mockbee headed to her job at Thermo Fisher Scientific, a biotechnology company near Florence, Kentucky, where she worked as a manager. She had worked there for 16 years, and her husband, Dan, also worked there but was off that day. Michelle went to work ahead of her scheduled shift to get a head start on her payroll duties and arrived just before 6 a.m. About an hour later, another manager tried to enter her office, but the door was locked. After noticing a blood stain on the carpet outside the office door, he began searching for Michelle elsewhere on the floor. Around the corner, he found her lying face down with a plastic bag over her head. She had been bound, gagged, and beaten to death. And although the door to Michelle's office was locked, the lock showed signs of tampering and possible forced entry. Like with most murder cases, detectives initially focused their efforts on Dan, who passed a polygraph and was quickly ruled out as a person of interest. Police narrowed their sights on a 38-year-old janitor named David Dooley, who was seen leaving the property a half hour after Michelle arrived and returning 30 minutes later. It fit with investigators' theory that the killer had gone somewhere to dispose of evidence and change. Due to his job position, Dooley would have also had access to Michelle's office, which was in a secure area that was off limits to many employees. Dooley worked at the property with his wife, who was also a janitor, but was at home at the time of the murder. The couple gave conflicting stories about why David had returned home briefly before driving back to work, which only heightened law enforcement's suspicions that he was the killer. Further investigation turned up evidence that Dooley and his wife had been clocking in on both of their time cards, even when only one of them was working, leading to the theory that Michelle had discovered what they were doing. The couple's time cards were missing from their usual place on the day of the murder, which would explain why Dooley may have wanted to get into her office. Police further theorized that he wasn't expecting Michelle to show up early that day, and that she arrived as he was trying to break in. Dooley denied killing Michelle and maintains his innocence to this day. He was found guilty in 2014 but won a new trial after arguing that evidence that could have aided in his defense had been withheld. A jury convicted Dooley a second time in 2019, and he's currently serving a 43-year prison sentence. He'll become eligible for parole in the year 2051 when he's in his mid-70s. Number 3. Laura Kunai. In June of 2024, 54-year-old Laura Kunai was found tied to a chair and beaten to death in an office closet at the storage unit rental business she managed in Cutler Bay, Florida. Police discovered her body after receiving a call from her partner and roommate, who said that Kunai had failed to return home from work the night before. She had lost so much blood that her cause of death wasn't immediately clear. Kunai was last seen alive the previous evening when she entered the apartment that she and her partner shared above the storage business, where they had lived for many years. In a visibly disheveled state, she asked her girlfriend for her cell phone, claiming that 4 people were going to kill her if she failed to obtain the device. The woman handed over her cell phone, and Kunai never returned. Based on the evidence, investigators believe Kunai was indeed held hostage by a group of people who beat her for information they believe she knew. Police believe the killers watched Kunai and familiarized themselves with her schedule prior to committing the crime. Describing her as a carefree spirit with no known enemies, Kunai's family doesn't know who would want her dead. More than 8 years later, the case remains unsolved. Determined to see justice served, Kunai's family continues to plead with the public for information. Law enforcement would also like to solve the case, and in 2024, Kunai was featured on a deck of cold case playing cards that are distributed throughout Florida's prisons. A $28,000 reward is being offered for tips leading to an arrest. Today's topic was requested by Christina Robinson, 5277, and Adam Friend, 8987. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Pam Zimmerman. 53-year-old Pamela Zimmerman was a successful financial planner and single mom from Bloomington, Illinois. She became engaged to her partner Scott Baldwin in 2014, roughly 2 years after divorcing her ex-husband, Kirk. Baldwin, who lived several hours away, became worried when Zimmerman suddenly went radio silent in November of that year. Zimmerman's children were also worried because she had failed to return home from work the previous evening. After receiving a phone call from Baldwin, the missing woman's neighbor drove to her office where she and an employee found Zimmerman dead from multiple gunshot wounds. A cell phone and wallet were missing but were later found along a roadside, leading to the theory that the killer had tried to stage the crime scene as a robbery gone wrong. Suspecting that Zimmerman had been killed by someone she knew, investigators focused on Baldwin, her ex-husband, and one of her clients, Eldon Whitlow, who was the last known person to see her alive. Whitlow said that nothing unusual had transpired during their meeting and was cleared of suspicion when his alibi checked out. He said he left Zimmerman's office at around 5:40, but a witness would later claim they heard gunshots around 5:10. Some of Zimmerman's loved ones, including her children, thought her fiancé, Baldwin, was acting suspicious after her murder. It was also discovered that he was talking with other women, but he was able to prove that he was at home when Zimmerman was killed. People also told police that there were lingering tensions between Zimmerman and her ex-husband, Kirk, who was upset about the financial toll that the divorce had taken on him and Pam's expectations for him to help pay for their kids' college tuition. Shortly before her death, she had threatened to take Kirk to court for failing to contribute his share of these expenses. Prosecutors charged Kirk with Pam's murder, but he adamantly maintained his innocence, arguing through his attorney that he was nowhere close to going broke like the state claimed, and that he therefore did not have a reason to kill his ex-wife. And while his car's data information suggested that he may have been near Pam's office at the time of her murder, his cell phone placed him at his home. In 2019, a jury found Kirk not guilty. He left the courtroom a free man, and Pam's murder remains unsolved to this day. Her surviving family members remain divided on whether they believe Kirk is guilty or innocent, and as things currently stand, it seems as though the mystery may never be solved. Number 1. Denise Prudholm. On what began as a typical Friday morning in August of 2024, 60-year-old Denise Prudholm clocked in at her job at a Wells Fargo corporate office in Tempe, Arizona at 7 a.m. The following Monday, employees reported the possible discovery of a dead body on the building's 3rd floor. Prudholm had passed away at her cubicle sometime after arriving at work more than 3 days earlier, and no one had noticed until that afternoon. Time card records showed that she had not left the building or punched out since clocking in for what ended up being her final shift. Employees had reported a foul smell before Prudholm's body was found, but the odor was reportedly blamed on faulty plumbing. Prudholm's cubicle was located in a less populated part of the building, and while many staff members worked remotely, a number of Wells Fargo employees shared their concerns over how long it took to discover their dead co-worker's body, especially since the building has 24/7 security. Authorities have not revealed a cause of death but do not suspect foul play. About a month after Prudholm's death, the union representing Wells Fargo employees announced that it was saddened and outraged by the tragedy. The statement went on to criticize the company for meticulously tracking its employees' productivity while failing to notice that a deceased worker went unnoticed at her desk for more than half a week. Thanks for watching. What did you want to be when you grew up? And what job are you actually working now? Let us know in the comments section below.